Woo! All right. Sorry for that late start. I will be better at setting an alarm and making sure we get started on time. Oh, wait. Dang it. Ah, okay. I have to change my audio settings. Wait, can someone say something?
Say
Okay.
something.
Okay, hopefully the audio works. I think I have all the correct settings now. So we're streaming, we're live. If anyone's here,
Cool.
we're talking about The Red Deal. It's a really good book. So,
Heck yeah.
heck yeah. Oh, I should put my camera on.
Love this book. This book is like a ray of sunshine in my week.
Yeah.
So, let's see. We've got probably the largest section so far that we've read. Um, this one's like 32 pages. It's just the entire Heal Our Bodies, uh, Reinvest in Our Common Humanity section, part 2. Um, and they have, I think it's 10 areas. Let me double check on that. Yeah, they have 10 areas that they are suggesting that we focus our grassroots organizing, our volunteering, all of our like community attention on to combat the various evil capitalism, and help revitalize our communities and heal our bodies. So each one of these has sort of like a little. Uh, they go into what the issue is, where it's happening, and examples. And at the end, they give you like examples of real world organizations that you can organize with, or things that have worked in the past. Um, so, because this is like covering a lot of ground, I wanted to see if there was a particular one that you guys really liked first before just like talking about the whole thing. And if not, that's okay because we can just get started on.
Yeah, I remember this section feeling really important, and I'm sure as we go through it, stuff will come up where I'm like, oh yeah, this thing is really great. But all of it just felt really crucial
All right,
to me, at
cool. So I
least.
think we could just start with the introduction then. Um, so they kind of just talk about like the problems of neoliberal capitalism. They have this really great bit on page 75, like halfway through one of the first paragraphs, where it says neoliberal capitalism financializes everything, turning all aspects of life and death into cascading horizons for exploitation and profit in the interests of the ruling class, including the unexpected windfall that COVID-19 has provided for the uber wealthy, like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. And this is kind of the major issue and problem they'll be returning to throughout this chapter, is just how these kind of um, how the neoliberal capital policies will shrink public programs and remove the minor reforms that have slowly accumulated over time to help people who minorities, etc., and how those have slowly kind of what's the word? Like, I'm looking for a word here. Like fallen off. Like they've fallen off the cart and they're just like gone as they've degraded and disappeared. But I wanted to do that at the front of this because that's about like the darkest bit that it gets. How these things are just used as profit. But I think that the message here is a lot more positive in that it's like giving you lots of things to do. Um, it's kind of it's like a shopping list of movements to aid and places to support people to talk to. Um, so I think we can just jump into the area one, citizenship and equal rights. Um, and one of the first things that they open with is just urging everyone to understand how imperialism operates in the first place. Um, their argument is that if you understand that, you'll be able to combat the uh, austerity measures across the world more effectively that will affect, people at home. This is, I think, mostly geared towards like U.S. issues. They use a lot of like examples from New Mexico in this chapter, things like that. So for those like outside the U.S., thinking about where U.S. imperialism is currently operating, I think would be effective use of this chapter as well. Um, but they do give an example of how the whole thing works. The NAFTA trade agreement that like gives advantages to corporations and doesn't allow for I don't know, the power of the workers to gain greater rights. Um, there's a They use this to kind of talk about how migrants are then exploited, and then like all the problems that they face. They do give like a little bit that I think is really good um, towards the end where they talk about like I'll just read it. I'm rambling at this point. Um, Migrants deserve a decent life with full human rights guarantees conferred by citizenship. So this is something that I actually hadn't heard of before. I'd never heard of a advocacy group advocating for all migrants to receive citizenship. That's seemed really radical to me at the time, and I was like, what? So I started looking into it, and it makes a lot of sense. Um, we give citizens in the U.S. anyway, we give citizens a lot of protections that migrants just don't have. And I like it seems weird to me now that like sounded strange, but I suppose that's kind of um, the effect of just living here in the U.S. all the time, being exposed to the constant kind of I don't know backlog of media that we just have, and all of its ideas. Um, but I thought that was really cool. There's a When I lived in Oregon, I used to swing down into California every so often, um, to this tiny little town called Tule Lake, California, just to visit this old lady. um, but just outside of town, there was a migrant workers housing. Um, it and this is I don't know if I've talked about this before, but it like kind of puts capitalism into perspective in my head. Um, this migrant worker housing was a refurbished Japanese concentration camp. Um, so they took the old buildings that they had built there in like the 40s. Um, they slightly updated them over time, and they turned like one section into a museum and the other section into migrant housing. And in 2012, I believe, they renovated the whole place so that it didn't look the same. So one half is like a cookie cutter house area, and the other half is like cinder block houses from the 40s that like look awful to live in. Um, but like the difference in time between those two things not being the same is small, uh, and people have been living there for a really long time, and that's terrifying, right? Like, oh my goodness, we're like putting migrant workers in the same housing that we interred Japanese people in the 40s. Like that's nuts. But at the same time, just down the road, there is another community of just like not migrant workers, but immigrants. Um, that's just like a small trailer park uh, that is even worse off than the Japanese internment camp. Um, and that entire stretch out in the middle of nowhere, where it's just people picking potatoes for large agriculture corporations, um, is like the best example I can think of like what this situation actually does to migrant peoples. Like it forces them into homes that do not have water or electricity. It forces them into homes that were made to, like throw Japanese people and like lock away the keys. Like this stuff hurts people, and like there will and out there's not a lot of opportunities to go anywhere else. Um, Nor is there a lot of jobs to pick from. You either work in agriculture, um, or you're really lucky and you get to work in Klamath Falls and maybe do something else. But that's like a 2-3 hour drive away. And they do talk about transportation later on in the chapter, um, about how without transportation, your rights are limited. And I can only imagine how difficult it would be to work and live in that kind of environment. Um, but let's see, the area one closes out by talking about how the U.S. needs to pay reparations for the damages that it's done. Um, they say repaying the debt of colonialism and imperialism in full will be impossible for wealthy nations who refuse to change their relationships to poorer nations. Um, so this is, in order for this to happen, the Red Nation is arguing that the like world order that has been set up around the imperialism of Western countries has to change, because without that change, all of that money that you'd be paying to poorer countries would slowly funnel into corporations who would funnel that back into, you know, the various Western nations and, rich people's pockets. Um, so this is, I think, especially the call for uh, human rights guarantees conferred by citizenship, I think is really cool. Did you guys find anything that you really loved? It's only a couple of pages, but if not, we can move on.
No.
I just feel like I'm talking a lot.
Did you want to go, Jeremy? Or were you gonna say
I'm not
something?
sure where anything is because I didn't have the book. I just listened to Lua's recording. Thank you, Lua, for that. Um, but I know that somewhere in it, with the reparations talk that you're mentioning, there's also they're talking about climate change and how much it's destroying the earth and how they won't be able to repay that either. And it brought to mind that there's an activist I used to follow on Twitter who, like, eventually he said some wild stuff and I stopped following him, so I don't remember quite who it is. But he said something that really stuck with me, that he was like, I don't believe in reparations because, and he's black. He was like, I don't believe in reparations for us because it will still end built on the indigenous people. And like that it struck me at the time and I was like, wow, yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. But when it's put into the whole context of what the Red Nation is saying, it's just like, even if you do believe in the concept of it, it's like, yeah, they're right, it will be too much. Like, it's already too much now. And the tab just keeps on growing every day. So it's like, honestly, the reparations framework is something that we kind of probably need to reconsider a little bit.
Yeah,
I don't want to
fix the
say
main issue
dismiss, but
first, then pay me back.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
so, like, your position is, like, to, like, fix, yeah, like, I mean, guys, I guess what Evan was saying, like, fix the issues and then give reparations.
Well, I mean, honestly, just dismantle everything. Like, I don't really want to be in a position where anybody is paying me back, or paying anyone else back or anything like that. It's like we just gotta cut everything down and start over because if it's still in a position where it's like you're responsible for this, you don't have the capacity to do it properly. So
Well, here's my argument
yeah,
against that. Like, I think me, where I grew up financially, like, I don't need reparations as a black person. But then there are so many neighborhoods that are in poverty where literally they just need resources, and reparations would give them those resources. And like they're, there's people who have food scarcity, there's people who, have all these like housing issues, and I think the black neighborhoods that are poor because they're black. Unlike there are poor white people, for example, but they're not poor because they're white. They're poor because of capitalism. But for so many black neighborhoods and communities, they're poor because of systemic racism and the history of that, and just being born in the middle of that. And reparations would actually solve a lot of problems. Like, people need resources, and it kind of doesn't. I think for the people who are in that much of need, it doesn't really matter. It just kind of just doesn't really matter. They just need resources. Period. It's about survival, and so I think like it almost just seems like trying to do like the noble thing or like what's right, when it's like, well, at the end of the day, people need resources, and we just have to get people who need resources those resources, and reparations is like the way to do it. Like, and it's also like, I think after slavery, it's like slavery and Jim Crow era and just everything. Again, like, I'm not even like speaking on behalf of myself as someone who has, as someone, there are just like people who just really need those resources. And we can talk all day about like, well, maybe we'll get those resources through establishing like housing programs. Maybe we'll do it through reparations. But I guess for me, it's like, as long as they just get what they need to survive, because it just doesn't matter if it's like done in like the right way or like the wrong way.
Cool. I don't. I think those are both like really convincing arguments. I think that like the main thing for me, I've been reading a lot of like critiques of money itself, like anarcho-communist like guys who are like, money is evil and we should not have it. Um, but like at the same time, there is that kind of pressing need, right? The just survive under capitalism is, I think, important. Um, if we could, change the system to be more beneficial to everyone, uh, without having to like use money to do it, uh, maybe those communities can get those resources. But currently, that kind of radical change doesn't have a lot of steam behind it. So I think the approach is probably different depending on the situation of the country you're in. Um,
Yeah,
in the
and I'm
U.S.,
also
it probably looks more like using money.
yeah, I'm also curious what this activist opinions are on just like having social programs, because those social programs are still funded by the government. It's just like, I don't really understand like why this person's like focusing on like not giving black people reparations when the government like would fund all these other things. Like, is this person just
Oh,
like
for the
against, like, yeah, is this person against like having like breakfast programs because the government funds that?
let's see.
Is not
What
like,
did
not in
they
this book, but like the
say?
person that Jeremy's, like the actors that Jeremy's talking about, like,
Oh, okay,
are
yeah.
is this
I
person
was
like
like,
against
what
like
did they
the
say?
government doing anything, like why reparations for black people when
And
black people are like the descendants of slaves, and like people have
I mean,
like
it
their
sounds very
parents like literally
libertarian.
grew up in like their parents grew up in Jim Crow era. We're not even talking about grandparents here. And this person's like going out of his way to say that he's against reparations. Like, does that mean he's, because like it feels like there might be some inconsistency there. Like, is this person just like against any social, like any help, any aid from the government? If
No,
he's
it's
going to
not
take that
like that.
stance.
I probably misrepresented his view a little bit, but it was said in the context of, looking at this from a big picture, and maybe that's the thing, is that we shouldn't necessarily be looking at it that big, and we need to take things, just in front of our faces. But in the big picture thing, it's like, if I'm relying on, let's say that, you can adequately recompensate, one neighborhood, and it's like, the U.S. agrees to pay for everything that it caused and inflicted on this one neighborhood. It's like, if we start tallying up the ledger, they're gonna be like super in debt when it comes to like how much they're paying back for how much destruction they caused. And
I
like
think it was something
the
like 4 trillion.
fundamental idea of paying people back, well, he said specifically, like, if we're paying black people back, then it's still, you got all of that wealth from living on stolen land. And so that was the part that he had an issue with, is that, like, I don't want money from you plundering somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
um, and yeah, for it to be like, built off of somebody else's suffering and then I'm profiting from it, even if it's not profiting, even if it's like just really correcting the wrong, then it's like there's still going to be other wrongs that you're not dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, I think if it was just reparations, that's true. That it's like other wrongs that you're not dealing with. But I think like reparations isn't the only solution that people are proposing. And then I also think black people, this is on stolen land, and also black people literally built the wealth of white people. And there's an issue where white people are hoarding all of the wealth that was literally built on the work and labor of black people. And so they could like redistribute that, like literally, like it's
Yeah.
hard for black people to gain, to like, especially like poorer black communities, it's harder for them to break out the cycle of poverty because of building the wealth of white people for hundreds of years. And so it's also like the stolen money and labor of black people as well. And so like there's just like a way where it just like hits a nerve where it's like, yeah, it's like it's on stolen land, and it's also like the labor of black people specifically. And so it's like it's not, I mean, I think black people have an entitlement to some of that. And yeah, I just I haven't heard what this person's like directly saying. So like, there's probably stuff I'm not quite understanding. And I also think there's like really no amount of reparations that will ever like make this situation right. But
Yeah, agreed with all that.
Cool. Um, so let's see. We've got 9 more areas to get through. But I did want to see, I think we can talk about some of them in tandem. Sorry. Um, so they have a couple of areas that they like specifically note that they are like in relation to other ones. Um, the next area that they talk about is free and sustainable housing. And then the next two are free and accessible education, and free and adequate health care. And both of those things, I think we can talk. Even maybe, one sec. I think we can talk about free, reliable, and accessible public transportation and infrastructure as well. So these next 4 areas, they all kind of contribute to one another. Um, I noted earlier about how if you lived in Newell, California, and like didn't have any um, like transportation, finding a job outside of the agriculture business there would be incredibly difficult. Um, and they like talk about these issues throughout these next bits. Um, and then they have this really awesome section in free and accessible education where they talk about the violence that is faced by um, queer people under the like current education system, especially in the U.S. And they eventually, is this later or is it? I think it might be later. Yeah, it's later. They talk about this like suicide rates and the oh man, it's such a long acronym. The murdered and missing like uh,
Yeah.
peoples.
I don't know if I'm
like
saying that right.
group.
I'm always like
It's so long.
MMWI2SG. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I think you did.
But yeah, every time I say it, I'm like, I'm gonna mess it up.
Long. I just want to like shorten it to like missing and murdered peoples, but like the specificity of it is important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Native women, girls, and Two-Spirit peoples is the rest of the acronym. Big issues. Sorry. I have a hard time organizing all of this stuff because it feels like there's just so much to like talk about, and there's so many issues that we can tackle. One of the things that I did like, and I mentioned this at the front, is just that despite the fact that these are all varied issues, they do kind of bleed into one another, and the Red Nation, I think, makes that pretty clear by calling for like grassroots organizing, volunteering, and community-driven like initiatives like every time. Like that's their whole thing. They mention later on, I forget where it is, but they talk about how the Murdered and Missing like campaign has grown into something that like they can sell T-shirts for, and like people are like talking about it, and politicians like talk about it, and all this stuff. But they emphasize how, like, even though that's great, like the important bit is that these kinds of awareness campaigns can come from and make change. They can come from these like grassroots organizing. Like that's what started this. That's one of their main points. I forget where it is. I wish I could find it. I highlighted it. I know I did because it was good. Yes, I found it. It's on page 104. They say, we remind our readers that the movement to stop gender and sexual violence against Native relatives began with radical grassroots organizations formed by everyday Native women. I thought that was really cool because they're reminding you, like, as they're like teaching you about these issues throughout the book. They're like, hey, this stuff worked. Like, it has worked, and it will continue to work, and we can keep doing this. We can keep trying.
Mm-hmm.
And we have seen progress. Sometimes I feel like there's a sort of like existential defeatism amongst just like leftists that I've met. And this I don't know about here, but like I've met other people on the U campus, and like, granted, there's not much of a left in Utah, so it is kind of depressing. But like, I'm always like, there's just so much to do.
Yeah.
like I hard back and be like, yeah, we got this done, but like, we haven't gotten these things done. I'm just more excited about getting more stuff done.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's just like a more positive outlook or just me being naive. I don't know, but like,
no,
I just feel excited.
Yeah,
to like try.
I think that's the people power. That, and yeah, feeling like you can do something, and it's like, yeah, how do you keep that going? Because it's like this ebb and flow of being inspired and like, wow, we can do this, being inspired by other people doing things, and then even you yourself doing things, and then also like seeing the state of the world and being like, well, even though I did this, like, so there's still so much to do, and it's like this ebb and flow. But yeah, I wonder about that myself a lot. Of like, well, I think that's a really important, like, people power is really important, and I've been wondering like how to just like keep that going, because whatever the solution is, it's in the people. It's in the people saying, we're not going to stand for this. We're going to build the future that we want to see. And so trying to cultivate whatever that is.
Yeah. I had this. Do you want to?
Yeah, it's kind of just on the same line of I keep running into people who want me to just kind of go along with it. Get used to living under capitalism, get used to dealing with extreme ableism constantly, and put up with it. And I don't know how they got to that place because I'm only 20 over here. But I do know that I don't want to leave it like this for me, for anyone else who continues. And um, there has to be a way to fix some of it, because if there isn't, then I don't know what the frick I'm doing. And I kind of already forgot where I was going with that, but basically, even as someone who is often considered extremely pessimistic, the attitude a lot of people have of just extreme nihilism, as if all of history already happened and we are the final result of it, bothers me, and I don't think that we have to have that. We can still do things now.
Like, we have a future.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I was just gonna say I often think that trend toward pessimism is like has roots in a Western essentialist mindset, where the Western world has really constructed these ideas of apocalypse, and so there is no tomorrow, right? Oh, we're always on the edge of apocalypse, like, and it's like, well, maybe, but within that there has to be some sense of renewal, like a constant like tending of your garden, right? And like the hopelessness that I tend to feel in the future, I'll try to like constrain my experiences to the people I care about in my present, like the immediate community I have, and find my joy there, and work in my joy toward like whatever that future that I want is, right? Like for everybody. But I definitely see across like leftists this thing of like, well, if we can't make this future happen, then the present doesn't have value, or something like that, and it I find that to be really frustrating, a very frustrating perspective to tangle with a lot of the time.
Yeah, agreed.
I'm with you there.
Um,
There was Oh, you go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
You're sure?
I'm 100% sure. Yeah, go on. I'll say it after.
Okay. I had this moment. I've been trying to listen to just like more music lately, and I really like trying to find like new protest music, because I feel like the only thing I've had access to is like Rage Against the Machine for most of my life. So I was just trying to been finding more, and I found this guy. His name, his artist name anyway, is Utah Phillips, and he's basically just like this old like labor organizer guy who's probably about as old as my who just sings old like Wobley songs and stuff. And I had this moment where I was listening to one of the songs. It's Solidarity Forever, which is set to the tune of John Brown's Body, which is Battle Hymn of the Republic, and as the quintessential Mormon boy, that those tunes threw me right back into church, where like a place where I like used to always feel safe and happy. And I think those kinds of things, like singing songs, finding other people, building community, I think those can infuse so much hope and like positivity into the whole. Like, it just made me feel good to like hear union protest songs to a tune that I knew. I was just like, oh, this is great. Um, I want to like go out and sing these with people, and I think that as we like start doing this stuff, that they like are like, hey, you should get going on these things in our local communities. Those feelings of like, and this is just something that I'm like spitting off the top of my head. This is like a philosophy I have, but I think maybe those feelings of like existential like defeat will go away like as we contact others. I think there's a line in Solidarity Forever that's like something about the feeble strength of one, but the union makes us strong. And I mean, like, if you're alone, it's hard to, fight the good fight. But if you find others who are there, just there with you, then maybe it'll be okay.
Yeah, I totally second that. Like everything that you're saying, Evan, I'm just like, yes, yes, yes. Like even talking about music, like I think music is really important. Like especially when you read about like the history of all of revolutionary movements. Like music is such an important part of that. And I also think like just having a community. I think I've said this before, but people will be like, "Oh, this isn't a social club," which I think is like, in some ways yes, in some ways no. But it's like actually like we are here because we care about each other. We're here because we want to make a better world for everyone. And I honestly think like our love for each other is the most powerful thing we have, as cheesy as that sounds. So it's like actually like we can't do this alone. We need to be in community with people, and that's really powerful. So yeah, like playing music with people, hopefully even things like book club can be like a part of that. But having friends doing things together. There's this really good quote that ties in with this idea. It's on page 87. It's in area 4, page 87 at the bottom. It says, organizing with other people creates a social context of accountability and relationality that helps with a number of health-related issues, such as anxiety, stress, and depression related to alienation and isolation under capitalism. Instead of taking our anger out on ourselves or our families, organizing allows us to channel our feelings into concrete steps that facilitate our liberation. To put it simply, organizing makes you feel good because you're supported and part of a group working towards a common destiny of well-being. Build grassroots organizations. And yeah, I think it's very true. But I think like organizing with your friends is like actually like really ideal. And the fact that they're your friends, the fact that they're people that you care about. And even if you're not like organizing and doing like a bunch of work, just like having these communities that you can be a part of, just to even start there, is really important.
Tom is having a time of it on the train over here.
Oh, really?
In the chat.
Oh, I didn't see the chat.
Sorry. We miss you, Tom.
Wait, what's Tom saying?
Oh,
I feel like giving you all a hug, Tom. I wish I wasn't on a train full of drunken carnival duchies. Drunken carnival. I don't know what that is, but I wish
he's in the Netherlands, so Dutch people who are drunk.
Okay. Well, Tom, I know that we all wish that we could give you a hug too.
Man. We've got
like
good
duchy, like past the duchy to the left. What is that? How can you be drunk?
Oh man, we've got I think 10 minutes left. Do we want to hit the last couple? We've got non-carceral mental health support and no more suicides, healthy, sustainable, and abundant food, clean water, land, and air, end gender, sexual, and domestic violence, and then finally, the aforementioned acronym, end missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit peoples. Most of this is focused on like providing care and stopping violence. And I mean, like these will tie back into the caretaking stuff that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, did anybody have like anything that they found that it was just like, dang, so good? I've got a couple. You want me to start?
I'm sure.
Yeah, it was actually from the last section. But just when they brought up that the housing, like the statistics on how many people are homeless and stuff, it doesn't include the people whose like houses are like barely functional. I was like, this is a really good point, and I don't know why people don't bring it up more. So that's
Right?
just something that jumped out at me.
I think that one's important too. I don't know what it is, but I always go back to freaking Newell, California. Just like, that place was terrifying. But I did have a bit that I really liked too. They were talking about the issues with conservation efforts, and how they do not fix systemic issues because they keep making compromises. Um, they had this really great quote. The problem with conservation is that it seeks parity between those seemingly opposed goals as an ideal outcome. Conservationists often try to strike a compromise between protection and development to win their campaigns. The notion of sustainability is a formula that commonly drives this compromise. Sustainability describes a desired balance between industrial pollution and environmental health that allows everyone to win and feel good about protecting the environment. And then they talk about how that's, not not the best. They have this bit where it says, conservation has certainly won some important gains for environmental justice, but it is ultimately a struggle for crumbs that offers defensive possibilities at best. The idea being that, like, yeah, conservation is good, but it's not actually combating the problems that are facing our environments and the people who live in them. It's simply holding on to little pieces. And this is me talking again about like local stuff, but this is something that I heard a lot about when it's probably still going to be a concurrent fight, but like the Bears Ears National Monument, people talking about like, oh, we want it to be re-expanded, other people being like, why expand something that's like honestly not gonna change how like the problems that the area is facing. Native peoples being just like, well, either way it still won't be ours. That sort of thing. I think there's a lot of like blind spots in major kind of campaigns. Like you hit like the surface level of like campaigning. I think, I don't know, but like most white people in my communities are talking about, it never reaches down to like the actual problems. It's always like a band-aid. It's not. There's always something that they're missing, which I think is like it's an important point when you're talking about like how to actually, get clean water, land, and air. In order to do that, you gotta, fix the pollutants, not just conserve some areas.
And maybe it's just me with the desire to just conserve some areas, but people seem to want to just block off some areas of wildlife from the west, from all of humanity, and act like we can have the nature areas and the human areas, as if we're not part of nature, and as if we can completely separate those things out, when really we should be able to live with both.
Yeah, they. I think there's a bit where they talk about that at the very front. Maybe it's somewhere, but they just talk about how like, uh, yes, it is. It's in the introduction. Um, they're talking about just like indigenous knowledge about how to interact with the world. Like you know, um, says there's this really great sentence here. This acknowledgement of respect for and dedication to the life of things, their rhythm and organization, is how we heal our bodies. Um, that stood out to me. I was like, hey, that's the title. That's the title of the thing. But yeah, like you gotta live in the world, not just separate from it. You gotta coexist. As much as that is a bumper sticker. Let's see. I think, I mean, this is important to the book, so we should probably like hit on it specifically. We've kind of talked around it, um, but the Area 10 end missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit peoples. I think if we didn't specifically address this section, we'd be doing a disservice to the Red Nation. Um, uh, they they hit on this often. Um, and they talk about some of the issues that they're facing, but there's this paragraph that I really liked, um, and this, let's see, yeah, we'll end on that one, and then yeah, so I'm just gonna read it because I was like, this is important. Um, as we note in the previous section, domestic violence is normalized and often underreported because it occurs so often in native homes, families, and intimate relationships. It is so common that it is often not understood as a form of violence. We need to change how we think about violence. Violence is not just about war or extreme physical altercations. The most common form of violence is domestic violence, and the source of the violence is heteropatriarchy. Um, and then they end off with uh, just, I thought this was good. It is important to have conversations with family about how negative attitudes about women and LGBTQ plus relatives, as well as our dependency on fossil fuel revenues and normalization of male privilege, contributes to this pandemic. This epidemic. I'm living in a pandemic. I use the word too often. But I mean, this is I like to like their call to action is, I mean, they've been talking about grassroots organizing for ages, but um, just like talking with your family when this stuff arises, I think is important. Um, I mean, I'm sh- I can't imagine how difficult that would be. um, uh, but I mean, if you talk to people, maybe things will change. I mean, that's sort of like a miniature building a community in a way. Um, I don't know. It's scares me. Just because I know women in my life who have like had difficulties with family, and talking with family is like tough. Um, but I mean, it's something I could do. So maybe it's something we can do. I don't know. I am not a trained uh, domestic violence counselor. Maybe
Yeah.
contact them too. Find your local resources.
I'm still trying to figure out how to talk to about anything like remotely difficult with family and others without just getting dismissed automatically and then ignored.
Yeah, I feel like so many families are like, you can't talk with them about anything that might upset them. But I have had luck. I've had luck with my family a little bit. Like I kind of just gave up on being able to communicate with them, and yeah, I just kind of like, okay, this isn't going to happen. I really need to just accept this and move on. And I've, I guess like recently, like I've reached out to them, and because a lot of people, I've known a lot of people who have died in the past couple of years, and so I'm like, I just want to find closure. And so I was like, hey, like this is kind of what's been going on for me, and I feel like I need to accept that we're not going to be able to work through this, but I just wanted to just maybe find closure and just talk about this one more time. And then things actually went well, like years and years later. So like, I think it gives me hope that like even if people don't always have the capacity to be able to receive what you're saying in that moment, that doesn't mean that that will never happen. Um, so I don't know. That gave me hope. But yeah, like I don't know, without saying too much, like I grew up in a physically abusive family, and everyone knew about it, and then, nothing happened. So it was like, I don't know. It's just like, yeah, nothing happened. And I think that's the case for a lot of families. Unfortunately. But hopefully like books like this, people just talking about it more, being like, hey, even though it's your family member doing that, that doesn't mean that it's okay. So like even in the Bell Hooks book, she's like, yeah, you shouldn't just be hitting your kids. People were like, what are you talking about? And like, I feel like now a lot more people get that. So like, just hopefully talking about more stuff like that, and just, people will start to realize like, oh, this is not okay.
Yeah. I hope so too.
Yeah, I have to echo what Louis is saying there. Is that for me, it's not physical, but emotional abuse was a lot. And it was accepted for a while, and then it's just like you keep pushing, and then years later, it's like, hey, maybe I wasn't right to do these things. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and in the moment, it feels hopeless and terrible and extremely frustrating and angry making. But yeah, keep pushing at it.
Keep pushing on.
Um,
That's everything I had for today. So
yeah,
yeah.
since there's like a few sections that we're just like skipping, like
Yeah.
I was wondering, and it's also okay if people don't want to do this. I was wondering, Evan, if it would be okay if we just like met like for like 10 minutes longer for the next one, and just like kind of went over those really fast too, just because like just
Sure. Which sections do you want to go through?
let's see. I don't know if we touched on clean water and air. Oh, maybe that's it. I think we did hit all the other ones. Oh, healthy, sustainable, and
Yeah.
abundant food. Did we? I think something.
Yeah, we didn't go into very much detail there.
And then like the suicide rates. I don't know.
Yeah, we didn't go into detail there either.
Maybe just like going over. I know we touched on the public to accessible public transportation. I feel like we covered that actually in the beginning, like you mentioned that like just like that's a sovereignty issue, and like putting it in those terms is really important. But yeah, I mean, can I just like say something really fast now about the suicide rates?
Yeah.
One thing that I really appreciated about that section is that at the end, it's like it says, we therefore know, this is on 93, we therefore know what works and what we need to do in order to reverse that trend of suicide for all people, restore dignity and indigenous values. Restore dignity and indigenous values. The only way this will happen is if everyone promotes decolonization, the return of indigenous lands, and true self-determination for indigenous people. But I really think, like, the idea of, like, restoring dignity, like, you know, like they say, like, you know, talking about suicide isn't just like having like a mental health, like, let's talk about mental health, like, let's talk about it, but also it's like, it is the society that we're living in. Like, our society is undignified. You have all these people, you know, that's, well, like, suicide is a result of that. So I really like how it framed it in those terms. And like, sustainable food, like they talk about how so it says, although peasant communities in the global south define sovereignty as a right to control the food you grow and eat, indigenous food sovereignty movements are focused on rekindling long-standing relationships with the land. Indigenous food sovereignty movements are about health revitalization, language conservation, and connecting with your elders. So especially for, like, indigenous movements, these things are all, like, these things aren't separated. The land and the language and the food, that's all super important. And and then just, like, the issue also with food, just, like, the way that they have, like, NATO and things like that just ends up serving big businesses, and that's an issue. Like, NAFTA, yes, not NATO. Oh my gosh.
It's okay. The Ukraine crisis is in full swing. Like, NATO's a big talking point right now.
Yeah.
It's just like my epidemic slip up earlier.
Yeah, totally. Okay, and then just, like, this thing in food, we recommend that all indigenous people stop taking direction from NGOs and environmental nonprofits and begin to devise a new paradigm of struggle to address climate justice that does not reproduce the traps of conservation. Oh, that was another important. Okay, maybe we should just, like, just like a few minutes in the beginning, because, like, the conservation, the idea of
it's really good stuff in here.
Yeah, but they just talk about, like, conservation, how, like, conservation still kind of like it's like making a deal or something, where it's like, it's still,
you compromise.
It's a compromise. Yeah, exactly. And so, like, we need to not we just need to not, these things are not compromisable. So about, like, you know, conserving the environment, like, this is not, you know, when you do conservationist movements, it is always a compromise, and we should just not be compromising on you know, protecting the land, being sustainable.
Yeah, I think
growing your food.
Let's see. Am I in the right section? Am I looking at the right section?
It's yes. Area 8, clean water, land, and air.
Yeah. The part that they end off with is, we can study and implement the People's Agreement of Cochabamba, Bolivia, which we reference throughout the Red Deal. And we can refuse to let capitalism destroy our future any longer.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, preach.
Totally.
Heck yeah. But yeah, I like that section too. It's a good one. Let's see, what is the next section? Because if we, it's heal our planet. So I bet we could start with, like, talking about that section, and then we can jump straight into just the whole planet section, because this is all about, like, pollutants, restoring things. Like, there's, like, full recommendation sections. Like, it's good.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, like, that's just a list of recommendations right here.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, next time we talk about the Red Deal, I mean, that's what we'll be talking about.
The recommendations?
Oh, just stuff, general, clean air, water. Like, that section will be.
Okay, gotcha.
Like, one of the first areas for the next part. That's like a big ass introduction, And then the first area is clean, sustainable energy. This is like reversed. You can't read this, can you?
No.
Why am I showing this to you? But yeah, like the very first area is clean, sustainable energy, and then it like keeps going through various topics like that. So yeah,
Awesome.
that one is page 113 to 137. It looks like,
Okay.
and then it's the conclusion.
Wow, I feel like that was fast.
Yeah, it's not like too big of a book. It's pretty short, but I mean, they've got a lot to say, and I like it.
Yeah,
I
I
think
love this book.
when we do hit the conclusion, we can do like a retrospective as well, where we just like, what are all the things that we've talked about?
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'm gonna end this
Greatest
stream
hits.
there. Anyone is watching, thanks so much for coming, and I'll see you hopefully next week with All About Love.
Woo.
Woo! Also,